What is my role as a publicist? My job, most simply put, is to mine for stories, mine for interesting stories, present that story to a journalist who I think or who I know would be interested, and present it in a way I know the journalist likes to receive that information. Well, how do you know how they like to receive that information, Amanda? We know because we've spent years in media relations. Our president, Beth Silverman, founded the Silverman Group over 20 years ago. So that means decades of getting to know key players in Chicago media and beyond and meticulously following them. We update our media contacts every day, multiple times a day. We follow people closely. We spend hours in the day consuming the news. We get all sorts of alerts. We're subscribed to all sorts of publications and e-newsletters. So in short, we know what they want because we've cemented so many relationships, but relationships take time, right? And I think it's safe to say that time is not necessarily something any person in this Zoom has in excess. So today we'll chat about some basic things you can do that won't take a lot of time, but will hopefully help you gain traction when it comes to capturing the attention of journalists who, by the way, also have no time. So I decided last minute to change the title of this to PR Hacks instead of PR 101 because this is in no way an exact science. There are tips and tricks that I have found helpful over the years, and I've tried to consolidate these tips into 3 basic buckets: building your lists, mining for stories, pitching your stories. And I thought it'd be easiest to illustrate these buckets if we had a tangible example. So for purposes of this presentation, we'll be talking about Amanda's Art Museum, for which I am the executive director, sole employee. And my art museum will soon be opening a groovy exhibition about rock and roll art from the 60s through 80s. So before we delve in, I also wanted to quickly point out that this presentation is geared towards a new happening, a new exhibition, in this case, a rock and roll one. If you're a dance company, you know, use these tips towards a new production. Same if you're a theater company. And some people in this Zoom, due to unforeseen circumstances, cough, cough, COVID cough, that was a bad joke, might not have anything new to discuss or announce. So these tips are good to keep in mind once you do have something new to announce. And if you don't know when you'll have something new to announce, you're feeling a bit desperate to remain on people's radar, I welcome you to email me after this. I'll have my email on the last screen and my contact information, because I'd be happy to quickly brainstorm with you some ways as a firm we would navigate how to elevate your organization when you don't have news coming up. So it might, it might mean, elevating your staff members, your board members, touting your institutional accomplishments. Perhaps it's a focus on creating a cool partnership. So do please reach out if that sounds like you, but indeed this presentation does focus a bit more on a new happening that you're announcing. So let's start by talking about building your lists, which I think is arguably the most important step in this presentation. If you spend time on anything, make it this. Make it creating a go-to list that consists of people who are most relevant to your organization, the low-hanging fruit, the people who cover you all the time, the people you have relationships with, that TV reporter who stopped by your theater or studio that one time for a story. Hopefully your list includes that reporter's producer. So since I run Amanda's Art Museum in Chicago, my go-to list has Chicago cultural writers, visual arts journalists, the people who will always be interested in my new exhibitions, no matter what the exhibition is about. So it's an evergreen list. So I would take the time to add as many obvious people to your list as you can. So really your go-to list does not include that, you know, New York Times cultural writer, your board member keeps harping on you about. That person can go on your wish list. And we all have wish lists, and absolutely you should keep track of a wish list. But those people shouldn't hear from you until you have something specifically for them. And if it's like a New York Times, something very strong with a national angle for them. Because this presentation is assuming that you're like me. You're the sole employee of your organization. You only have time to craft one great press release. You only have time to send out one new thing about your exhibition. And if you have a go-to list, no matter how small or large it is, when you get closer to opening your exhibit and you maybe have 30 minutes to do some personalized follow-up, which is also important, then you're working off a list that's less overwhelming, that it assures you're reaching out to people, the right people. You're not wasting your time following up with like people on a list who you don't even know who they are. You're working off a list where you know what the people are all about. And if I'm lucky enough as the director of Amanda's Art Museum to have an intern who needs a project, I'd probably have them put together a separate niche list of low-hanging fruit specific to my exhibition. So journalists who cover rock and roll, since they would be interested in my rock and roll exhibition, hopefully. But I'm not going to put them on my go-to list because I don't always have a rock and roll exhibit. Really, this go-to list is like your Bible. Take care of it, keep it updated, hold it near and dear. Another big tip I have on this slide is calendaring your outreach. So your production opens in December. You're gonna go, you know, 3 to 4 months back and mark in your calendar in August that I need to reach out to the long lead publications on my go-to list. And then I calendar 4 to 6 weeks before opening to send my press release to all these short lead people. And I've indicated on this slide, long leads are basically magazines. Short leads are a lot of things. Things to do columns, social media influencers, broadcast, TV, radio, weeklies, dailies, blogs, websites. So you can see how you could really like maybe make it a goal once a day to add someone on your go-to list from one of these categories. Like you'll never run out of looking for people. So as far as the calendaring of outreach, you know, this is bare minimum. As a publicist, there's a lot of other points in time we reach out to specific people. We'll send sneak peek invites to select media or critics. We'll send media alerts that are mainly to get TV cameras to capture specific visuals or interviews. We'll host an influencer event. So by no means am I presenting here a full PR campaign. Again, I'm just showing the hacks. And speaking of calendaring things, make sure to calendar any commemoration or historic date related to your organization, as well as your upcoming production or exhibit. So for my rock and roll exhibit, I marked down July 7th because I know that National Day of Rock and Roll is July 7th. So maybe once July 7th comes around, maybe I'll have time to reach out to a few people, maybe a rock and roll station or a field reporter, and say, hey, I have this great idea if you happen to be looking for National Day of Rock and Roll stories. Janis Joplin's featured in my exhibit. So I happen to mark down her birthday in my calendar because maybe there'll be something fun to do around then and an opportunity for a story. So calendaring these types of things, even if they're silly, those silly national holidays, is a great way to work to try to get awareness throughout the run of the exhibition when like it's not new anymore. So growing your lists. So you might be saying to me, Amanda, I don't have time to research who my go-to people are, to be adding them to any list. Maybe you're quite literally starting from scratch, or you want to grow your current list. So a few hacks on this slide include signing up for Google Alerts. They are free. Do it right now if you're not already signed up for them. Most of you probably have Google Alerts. And pretty much you set up a Google alert to, you set up the name of your organization so that anytime you're mentioned on the web, you get an email with that information. And when you get the alerts, even if the writer only maybe mentioned you in one sentence on that blog or website or news site, if it's a cool website and if the writer seems like an obvious fit, add them to your go-to list. If you can't find their email address, friend them on whatever social media site they seem to be using the most. And then when you connect on social media, that opens you up to message them and introduce yourself. And for the love of Bob, do not message anyone going on and on about how great your organization is. Rather, position yourself as a resource, position your organization as a leader in the field. So something like, hello, Tim, lovely to connect with you. I'm Amanda, Exec Director at Amanda's Art Museum. We host up to 6 rotating exhibits a year that cover everything from surrealism to pop art. Our upcoming exhibit highlights psychedelic rock and roll art from the 60s. If you're ever looking for a VIP tour or intriguing interview subjects, feel free to reach out to me at amandaartmuseum.org. If you'd like to be added to our media list, let us know. So that was just an email or a social media message that positions me as someone who is helpful for them, who's trying to help them, instead of pay attention to me trying to get something from them. And then I might also set up Google alerts for rock and roll art 60s, rock and roll art 70s, rock and roll art 80s, so that anytime people are writing about that stuff, I can see like maybe they'd be interested in my exhibit. Maybe I'll set up alerts for the artists represented in my exhibit to see, you know, as we get closer to my exhibit, where are they in the news and how can I leverage that to promote my thing. So basically, if you don't have time to do research, you're at least getting some research coming straight into your inbox. Another big tip I have, if you're not already following Robert Feeder, for a long, long time, Mr. Feeder has been writing about what's going on in Chicago media landscape. So he announces journalists who move on to a new gig, new broadcast segments, everything. If Robert Feeder says there's a new cultural editor at Chicago Magazine, don't be afraid again to look up the editor via email or social media. Hey, congrats on the new gig. And then again, position yourself as a resource and connect with them so that they recognize your name and they will at least see like, oh, that person was friendly. They weren't just trying to hound me for an article. And ultimately, and this might sound obvious, you need to be a consumer of the outlets that you wish to secure. So, you know, following the outlets on social media, signing up for all their e-newsletters, things like that. That's just going to slowly help you without taking too much time. You know, it doesn't take much time to sign up for a newsletter, and you can really just browse through the headlines and you'll discover things. I mean, we discover things every day just by doing that. Like, oh, who's this new writer? Oh, this is a new feature that this outlet never did. So mining for stories. So I sent my initial announcement, my initial press release to my go-to list. And maybe I got a couple stories, maybe I didn't get much pickup. I'm closer to opening. It's time to do some more personalized follow-up on that list. And I will say, just as a publicist, the follow-up is where we get the, where we're most successful with securing coverage, not the mass press release send. The follow-up is when people know, oh, you're talking to us. This isn't just a mail merge. So follow-up is effective. And what I do is I go to my sent to the original email to the person, so Nancy, and I'll kind of reply to that thread, the initial press release, and say something like, hi, Nancy, following up on the press release below. The phrase following up, language is very important. An email, like there's like this art to emailing, I feel at this point. The phrase following up is, to me, the most polite and effective way of saying, hey, it'd be great if you replied. But also journalists get hundreds of emails a day. So it's really smart to follow up because your email certainly got buried, and including their first name even off the bat lets them know, okay, this message is for me. What you say in that email follow-up might vary depending on if you're reaching out to print media versus broadcast, which we'll go into in the next slide. But in general, your follow-up email is noting at least one, but hopefully all of the following: timeliness and or news hook, compelling interview subject, wealth of visual assets. So here's an email example. I'll quickly read out loud. Hi Nancy, following up on my email below to alert you that this week only, rock impresario Ellen Wadey is in town to discuss her newly open exhibition, Rock and Roll Art from the 60s through 80s. Ellen, you're the curator of this exhibit. I don't know where you find the time. Click here, and I always link to a Dropbox link, and I always title the photos and images with the caption. So take the time to make sure your selection of photos has the captions and credit embedded in the photo. Journalists hate having to reach out and be like, what's the credit for this photo? Give them everything in a nicely wrapped bow. Click here for a sampling of photos that illustrate the electrifying trip one can take as they view the psychedelic poster art. During an interview, Ellen can discuss how she amassed the collection and share rare stories about her time with Jerry Garcia and Pete Townsend. Happy to help you pull a great package together, Amanda. So there's no news hook there. This doesn't mention anything in the news, but it's timely. Ellen's only in town for 1 week. And this is where PR spins come in handy. You can make something timely, right? You can make something sound urgent that maybe isn't urgent, but right now you need to cover this. So, and then you'll see here, I put a note saying work with what you've got. This might be another great intern project. So my exhibition has poster art from 10 different artists who are all still alive. And a really easy way to find other entryways for journalists to want to cover my exhibit is to find out more about the artists through maybe a simple SurveyMonkey or Google form asking what neighborhood they live in, what university. Oh, and they all live in Chicago. This is such a made up example, but they all live in Chicago. You know, what languages do they speak? So I have an artist that lives in Andersonville. I'm gonna pitch them to the Andersonville Buzz. I have an artist who is Latinx. I'm gonna pitch them to Univision. I have one who graduated from Columbia. I'll pitch them to the alumni publication. So this helps us pitch niche news while still highlighting our main thing, our rock and roll exhibit. And it's important to remember in general that you and the people you work with are experts in their fields. You are an expert in your field. You are a thought leader. Just because you might not be a high profile executive, you can be of interest to the media because you have perspectives and knowledge that the general public doesn't have. So just remember that. Okay, pitching your story. So in the last slide, we said what you want to emphasize in your follow-up pitches: timeliness, interesting interview subject, wealth of visual assets. So this just gets more granular because someone working in broadcast is on a whole different wavelength than someone working for print. So I'm not going to read through all this. You guys look at the PDF of this later, but and I think they're pretty self-explanatory. But another hack I want to add that goes back to calendaring has to do with magazines. Make sure when you're calendaring things, I would go to the website of your local magazines and find their media kits and look for their editorial calendars. Their editorial calendar is going to say what their upcoming issues are going to be about. So when you're ready to reach out to magazines and you happen to know that October 2020 is when CS Magazine is going to highlight 50 influential Chicagoans, you might want to send a pitch along with your press release saying, you know, the curator of this exhibition, Ellen Wavy should be considered for that story, because not only did she curate this excellent exhibition, but she also did XYZ for our community. And it certainly didn't used to be this way, but you'll see in bold letters at the bottom, email is always the preferred contact method these days. So make your subject line count. So that kind of concludes me talking at you about made up exhibitions. And like Ellen said, you'll receive a PDF of this presentation, and I believe a recording as well. And so you will have my contact information here. I really do welcome you to reach out and friend request me and follow the Silverman Group, and let me know if you have any questions, which we can start answering now.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. That was wonderful. This is Clover speaking, in case you all don't know. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over your questions and offer them to Amanda. Okay, first up, do you need to pitch television different than print?
Yes, so television for me is, I like pitching television because I feel like I can do it last minute. So I'll give you the example of where I'm even at this morning. I'm currently at the Elmhurst Art Museum, and they just opened a Frank Lloyd Wright exhibit. And so I did, maybe 2 weeks before opening, a lot of follow-up pitches to producers at TV stations. And I mean, it's an excellent curator of the exhibit, Tim Samuelson, the Chicago's cultural, he basically is Chicago. He wasn't able to make it today, unfortunately, but I really touted him because he has been the Chicago's cultural historian for years. He has such amazing stories. So I shared stories, hi, Natalie, following up on my press release below. Next week, Tim Samuelson is available, and he can talk about how he hung from buildings to capture some of the building fragments and things like that. And she, had an opening today. Yes, she answered right away. Hey, can we do it Tuesday? Now, granted, I've worked with Natalie a few times. We've connected on social media, we engage. So I make sure that people, once I met Natalie once, I followed her on social media. When they're here, I take photos of during the interview and promote it, and I encourage the museum to promote it so that the news station feels like, wow, we're kind of getting something out of this too. So I hope that answers the question. I think that it's kind of a good thing to focus on is reaching out to producers, because they can function last minute and they can put things together last minute. But I will say, now in this virtual, now with the, we used to set up a lot of in-studio things, in-studio performances, or like in-studio interviews. Now with everything through Zoom, I would say it's easier, but TV stations like to show visuals. So a lot of times in order to secure these interviews, I have to get visuals, but at the same time, like in a museum case, the exhibit's being built, it's not visually ready until it's open, but we want people to know about it right before it's open. So I get as many as I can, and I send them to the station, and I'm like, look at this, and by this date we can kind of, they don't like, pre-COVID, they don't really like accepting a lot of B-roll video from other sources. They like to take it themselves, but I'm finding more and more that they're okay with having that. And in fact, it kind of helps if you have that, you're doing that work for them. The more work you can do for them, the better. So I hope that helped.
That's really interesting, Amanda. In regards to visual assets, someone would like to know, are there other assets that can be used aside from, let's say, production photos?
Yes. So if you have, a curator, a choreographer, really great headshots of them. When I worked at the Holocaust Museum, we had an exhibition organized by Carrie Kennedy. And we had no exhibit photos, or at least not installation shots, nothing really exciting looking, but we had this really great shot of Carrie Kennedy that she took, that she sent along to us, and CS Magazine made it a full bleed page. And she did an interview about the exhibition and talked about the exhibition. There were no photos of the exhibition, but just having quality photos of your key players that have to do with your production or your staff or things like that can go a long way. You know, a magazine might have a blank page that they're looking to fill, and they may have not been planning on doing a story on you, but they're like browsing through your Dropbox photos and they're like, wow, this is a great image. That goes a long way with magazines, especially.
Great. So let's say someone is contacted by a reporter. What do they need to prepare?
Well, I guess it depends on the reporter, and the reporter will tell you their deadline. They'll tell you what they want and need and when they need interviews. But I think it's important to treat the reporter like they're your boss, and they're like hiring you for a job or something. You know, I would say if the reporter's like, I can only do the interview at 10 a.m. tomorrow, and say you have a meeting already, cancel the meeting. Granted, you know, if it's a website, usually reporters know, like if the Tribune's reaching out and they say Tuesday only, you know, cancel the meeting. Obviously, all press is good press. If it's some small website, maybe they'll be more amenable. You know, websites have less of a deadline. But what was the question? What do you need to prepare?
Yes.
I think they're pretty clear on what they want from you. They'll say, I'm hoping to interview so-and-so about XYZ, or they might want to come visit. You know, it depends on if it's print. They might have a really tight deadline, but they'll be clear with you. I mean, and that's the thing too, is once they are in your inbox, ask them the questions you need to ask them. They'll reply right away because they're on deadline. And but I think so much, you know, when I've worked with people, I'll sometimes come up with ideas, especially during COVID. You know, I'll say, oh, it'd be great if we could set up, you know, for a client who has ongoing like Zoom things that there or virtual like Instagram live things. I'll say something like, oh, can we make the June virtual program something Pride related? Since it's Pride Month, I think that'll get us more attention and kind of like the things to do columns. And sometimes I'll have people tell me, well, you tell me if the media is interested and then we'll make the program the Pride thing. Like, no. And I have suggested to some people, if you do a program like this, you'll get more attention. And now we can do that with virtual stuff. We can kind of make up things because we know that they'll get more attention and more spotlight. And publications are looking for virtual events because so many people are doing them. On the same front, I'm sorry I'm rambling, I'm just thinking of things. On the same front, you know, some people are like, well, why isn't my virtual thing, why isn't it in the news? Why isn't it a story or a feature article? Well, is it a groundbreaking virtual thing that no one else is doing? Because everyone's doing virtual stuff. But don't underestimate those things to do columns. Those emails you get from like Thrillist or Chicago Magazine, 15 things to do this weekend, Streetwise, The Reader, you know, those are the first things people look to find out what they're going to do that weekend. And if you're looking for engagement for your program, you should be focusing your program there, maybe instead of trying to get some big story on it, because that's what's going to bring you some ROI.
Right, great. So in relationship to in contacting a reporter, Well, first of all, how do you figure out who to contact if you're just you're looking at various resources and you're trying to build your list? Who do you figure out, how do you figure out who to contact? And then what is the right amount of contact? Is it possible to bother somebody too much?
That's a common question, and it's a good one. So like in the case of, a rock and roll exhibition, I'm just going to keep using my example. I would research, I'd have to do some research because I'm not a rock and roll expert. I would do research on recent rock and roll articles and who's covering those. And I think going back to the slide that shows kind of like the divvying up of the short leads, you have your things to do columns, you have your magazines, dailies, weeklies. So like who in the Chicago Reader writes about music? Okay, this person wrote this article recently. I mean, that's just Googling. Okay, I can't find their email address. Let me follow them. Let me follow them on social. Who's their editor? Who's the editor of this section of the paper? And I think, kind of a good formula as far as how often is you're sending them your initial announcement, your initial press release, which we could probably have a whole other workshop on what makes a good press release, but there's a lot of templates online you can find. But really the journalist wants to know who, what, when, where, why, quotes, main players, why are they great, why is this great, why is this different, what can the general public get out of it. So you're sending that, again, you have your go-to list and you're sending that press release to all these people on that list so they know about it. They're aware of it, it's on their radars. Hopefully you do another follow-up for the people who make sense. Like I said in the publication, hey, following up on the below, I thought you'd be interested, so give something that feels almost like a nugget just for them. I saw that you just covered such and such rock and roller. Did you know we have this rock and roller in our exhibit? We'd love to set up an interview for you. Again, make yourself feel friendly. If it seems like someone who's an obvious fit, maybe a week later, another follow-up, and then I let it go. So I'd say 2 follow-ups. But I work at a museum. I've worked at a museum for many years before this current job. Steve Johnson has been covering museums for the Tribune for years and years. And I learned, to not freak out if he didn't reply, because I know that he sees press releases and gets them. And if he's interested, he will come, So I'll go sometimes years without getting a reply from him, and I'll follow up and I'm like, okay, he's not interested. It is hard because you feel like your outreach is falling on deaf ears and you're like, am I not giving them something correctly? It's not falling on deaf ears. And that's what I think is so important about curating that go-to list, is that the people will have your name in their head, and the next time they need something related to what you do, they already know, wait, there's that person who has been reaching out to me, let me find them, and they might reach out to you about something you don't even want to promote, but you fit in with their story. I would honestly trust that they are reading it, but also for people you really want to secure, consider offering something just for them, perhaps an exclusive interview with someone that no other publication gets. In the past, I've had CS Magazine, Chicago Social say, of these photos, we really like this photo. Can we be the only publication to use this photo in the market? Yeah, so things like that. Again, you're positioning yourself as a resource. I have a photo just for you. Let me know by next week if you want it. Otherwise, I'll have to keep sending it on. It's experimentation, honestly. And that's why you hire publicists, because they've done the experimenting for you. They know what works with certain people. Everyone's work style is different, just like my work style is different from all of your work styles. So these are like these nuances. It's like you can't just mass send things to people, but if you do, because you have no time, make it the people who count.
Well, and speaking of the various people that count, what kind of recommendations do you have about building relationships with non-traditional platforms, blogs, neighborhood sites, or even reaching out to somebody out of state if you have like an alumni of a university and developing a relationship with somebody at the university level?
So this is just me, my colleagues might have a different way, but when I'm trying to reach out to someone who I know doesn't know me or my name or isn't familiar with me, and this might sound, I don't know if this sounds excessive, but I will follow them before reaching out. I might follow them for a few days or a week. I might start liking their stuff. They're seeing my name. They're starting to see my name on Twitter. Oh, they retweeted. Oh, the Silverman Group keeps retweeting my stuff. Like nothing excessive, nothing like stalking, but engaging with them on stories or things that have to do with maybe the thing I'm about to send their way. And then when I reach out, there's a familiarity that I can bring to the tone of the email because hopefully they've seen my name somehow, but I know what they've been posting about. I know what they care about. I know how they talk. I mean, again, this is kind of the weird nuance. Art part of it is just testing the outreach to see if it lands. And then maybe, I'll follow up the next week. But that's how, when you've never worked with someone or anything. And also I ask, we're friends with other publicists, so we'll ask around, have you ever worked with so-and-so? I've done that plenty of times. There's so much turnover in the industry, and so I'll have been getting responses continuously from a certain producer that suddenly I'm not hearing from, and then I learn later they moved on, and I'll ask a friend publicist, who do you reach out to there? And they'll tell me, especially if, we have different clients and there's not too much competition, but so that's really that's part of building the relationship, is following and consuming what they have. And it might take a week for you to understand what this Block Club Chicago writer cares about and what's getting highlighted in the newsletters. So what is my thing that might be of interest to them? It takes time.
That's great. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful insight. This has been really wonderful. If anybody has any other questions that they would like to drop in the chat, please go ahead. There is one, someone's having a little bit of trouble trying to figure out where they find that editorial calendar that you referred to.
Yeah, some magazines don't have it. Some magazines have it on their website. You usually have to go to advertising. You look for advertising, and then they'll have a media kit, and then it'll usually have, the demographics of who reads their publication, and maybe you have to scroll a little to get to the editorial calendar. Or if you find the advertising contact person, there's most certainly going to be an advertising person's email on the website, reaching out to them. The one, drawback is they're going to think you want to purchase advertising. So you might hound them, which they might hound you, which whatever. But yeah, so you can, if it's not on their website, you can find the advertising contact and email them, and they'll certainly email it to you, probably in a pretty timely manner.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Any more questions right now for today, Ellen?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And, just to make it clear, I am never too busy for rock and roll. There will always be time for rock and roll.
Hanging out with Jerry Garcia.
Well, that'd be a little tricky right now. We can hang out in the afterlife.
Yeah.
But thanks everybody for coming today. Again, just to repeat that we will be sending out both the slide deck and a recording to everyone who participated. It's got Amanda's information on there if there's a question and you want to reach out for that. I hope this was helpful. We wanted to just kind of help you guys establish a baseline because I know that PR and marketing can seem like it's overwhelming. And I think just to reiterate what Amanda has said is, you know, figure out what's the right size of attention you can give to this and figure out how to fill that time. I know it can be pretty stressful to think I have no time to do all of this. So just figure out what part of it you can do. And, you know, I think Amanda's tips were really helpful in terms of how to prioritize things. So hope this was helpful. Hope everybody has a good day. And thanks so much, Amanda.
Thank you, guys.